About Cincinnati, what a team, what a team, what a team. And lady, from 1 to 80, how they scream, how they scream, how they scream.
Welcome, Reds fans, to another edition of We Love Our Team. Along with my friend and co-host Randy Freking, we're joined today by Bob Freking, Joe Greiner, and Ben Greiner. If those last names sound familiar, it's because they are our sons. So this is the equivalent of those father-son Reds games you used to see where Ken Griffey was pitching to Ken Griffey Jr. and Pete Rose was tossing with Petey. Bob Freking is a 2006 graduate of St. Xavier High School and a 2010 graduate of Xavier University. Bob is a father of two and works at Intellex. Joe Greiner was a classmate of Bob's at St. X. Joe went to Miami University and then to law school at Ohio State. He's a father of three and works in the legal department of Fifth Third. Ben is a 2008 graduate of St. X. He too attended Miami University and law school at the University of Cincinnati. Ben is single, good news to all our lady listeners, and works in the legal department of August Star Life Insurance. So welcome to the podcast, guys. We've been talking about doing this for a while, so we were finally able to make it happen. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having us.
I'm fired up.
Happy to be here.
All right. No, we like that. Oh, the studio audience, Jack. This is great. A lot of people tuning in today.
That's right. So, guys, tell us each how it was that you became Reds fans. Did you have any say in the matter at all, given who your fathers are?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. So
this is Joe Greiner going first, so you can recognize their voices when you're listening.
Yeah, they'll probably know by the intelligent answers as they listen to more of this.
Nice.
I'm the one speaking, but I would say, my dad was a huge Reds fan for as long as I can remember, obviously, since I was born. So I think his enthusiasm for watching baseball and watching the Reds in particular, it was never a feeling like it was forced upon me or Ben, but you just see how exciting it is that, my dad would get. And also, my grandfather, who my dad's dad, was a huge baseball player and a big Reds fan. I'm named after him, so I think that was a big part of it for me as well.
How are you, Bob?
Speak for yourself, Joe. I had no choice but to be a Reds fan. The 1990 World Series, I was 3 years old. My parents were walking out the door. Babysitter was there. They were going to the game. And I fell and split my head open on one of our dining room tables. I don't know the whole story, but I do know that my parents were eventually at that game, and I was at the hospital that night. So from a very early age, it was embedded in me to be a Reds fan. And I wouldn't have it any other way.
Did social services have to get involved there, Randy? I mean, that sounds like,
there is a rumor. There is a rumor that my parents have been pulled into separate rooms at the hospital to question what happened.
Bob went to the hospital so much between ages 0 and 3 that they did literally pull us into the social services office one time to quiz us a little bit. But that night, our friend Les Gunzenhauser moved him in front of the line, so we got him home, and then he had to go back to the hospital later, but we had a babysitter or a friend take him to the hospital, but we made it to the game on time. That was game 2, 1990.
Nice. Ben, how about you? Did you have any choice in this matter?
Well, I mean, you and Randy are hosting a podcast called We Love Our Team, so no, I don't think that I really did. But in all seriousness, like Joe said, I don't think you ever pushed us into being Reds fans, but how excited you were and how fun the games were as a kid, it was hard not to fall in love with the team immediately. So I can't remember a time when I wasn't a fan.
Nice.
And I know the listeners can't see because we're also recording this through video chat, but my son, who's also named Joseph Edward Greiner, he's the third. He's right behind me. And just to go back to my answer, I'm named after my grandfather, Joseph Edward Greiner, the first, so I'm the second. He was a baseball player, played baseball, I think semi-professionally. And so now that my son's standing right behind me, one of the cool things about that is, my son, who's named after my grandfather, he was actually born on the anniversary of the day that my grandfather passed away. So it's kind of a cool continuation. And I think my son will also, whether it's by choice or not, be a big Reds fan.
Yeah. Hi, JT.
He just started kindergarten, so he's having a good week. It's been a busy week in our house. He had his first day of kindergarten on Wednesday. So he just wanted to stop in, I think, and say hi. He has occasionally listened to the podcast and has always wanted to make a brief appearance. So
That's great. That's great. Yeah. How about some of your earliest Reds experiences? Bob, you were in the hospital during the 1990 was it the World Series or the playoffs?
That was the World Series.
Okay. So it was game two. So it was the Joe Oliver knocking in Billy Bates game.
That's the night that my wife Sue, Jack, we were driving down 6th Street to go home, get on Columbia Parkway, and Sue was hanging out the passenger window with a broom waving in the air. She
That doesn't sound
anticipated
like
a
Mom.
sweep.
Nice, nice. So what Bob, Joe, or Ben? I'm just curious if you can think back to maybe one of your earliest memories involving the Reds.
Yeah, so one of my earliest memories, I was thinking about this the other day, was the 1995 NLCS. Is I think my very first Reds memory. I would have been 8 years old, and I vividly remember someone on the Braves hitting a home run off of the left field foul pole in the NLCS. And in my mind, it was Ryan Klesko, but I looked it up, and it was actually Javi Lopez. But I
Ah,
remember standing on the concourse with my dad behind the green seats and watching that, and that is literally my first memory of the Reds.
yeah, that '95 series with the Braves was a little disappointing, but you know,
Isn't that the Reggie Sanders series where Reggie struck out like 12 or 13 times?
Yep.
yeah, yeah, he kind of disappeared, but there was some pretty good pitching on the Braves side, so we'll cut him a little slack.
Reggie was my daughter's favorite player, Becky. She loved Reggie Sanders for some reason. How about you, Ben? What's your earliest Reds memory?
My earliest Reds memory is watching that 1990 World Series video on repeat. As kids, Joe and I pretty much watched that every single day. So I remember the two old women saying, "Who's Billy Bates?" That's my earliest memory.
Where's King Yones?
I was actually going to mention that video as well. I think in the deepest recesses in my brain, I think that I have a very long lost memory of people celebrating when the Reds completed the sweep in 1990. I would have been, 3 years old, so I don't have vivid memories, but whether that's a real memory or not, I definitely remember that video. And for some reason, I also have a really vivid memory, for whatever reason, of riding on a bus and people starting to talk about the 1994 strike and that the season was going to be canceled. And that was incomprehensible to me. I didn't know really what that meant. And I assumed that people were just, sort of pulling my leg or lying about it. And I remember getting home and getting confirmation that, yeah, the season might actually be canceled. And for whatever reason, that isn't really a Red specific memory, more of a baseball memory, but that really stands out in my
Yeah.
mind.
And you guys hung in there despite the strike. I mean, weren't you pretty disappointed as 7-year-olds to realize all of a sudden your players could stop playing the game, that they should just play for free?
Yeah, I was young enough to be disappointed, but then easily distracted enough to just kind of move on relatively quickly and get on with things. So maybe I was young enough that it didn't have too much of an impact. And then, obviously in 1999, I was a little bit older, but that was probably jumping the gun here. But one of my favorite Reds memories was that 1999 team. How fun they were, kind of came out of nowhere. And a lot of fun players on that team. So that probably got me definitely hooked and re-engaged at that point.
I've told this story, I think, on the podcast before, but I remember that '99 season, the Reds playing. I want to say the Tigers. I think it was an interleague game, and they fell behind like early 5-0, and I went out, started cutting the grass, and the Reds came back and tied it. Joe came running out to tell me that they'd come back and tied it, and it really hit me because it was like, Joe was 12, And I was 12 in 1970, and just that sort of excitement that you felt about a good team. The 99 team wound up losing that one game play-in with the Mets. But Ben, do you remember where we were the night that they kind of blew it against the Brewers?
I don't remember where we were that night. I remember
We
the
lost
game.
Ben for a minute.
Well, he'll come back and join us. Bob and Joe, who are your favorite players in the 90s?
Favorite players in the 90s. I would say Hal Morris was my favorite player in the 90s. I actually wrote a letter to him in 1994 when the players went on strike, telling him that they could practice in our backyard if they needed a place to play. And we still have that framed, actually. It's pretty funny. But Hal Morris was awesome. I don't know why I liked him so much. I think the no batting gloves, kind of the lefty, funky stance, first baseman that was sort of a slap hitter, but was a really good hitter. I would say Hal Morris.
Jack, that letter was unbelievable. I mean, he's 7 years old. It's on like an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and it's in pencil. And it's like, "Dear Mr. Morris," I don't know the exact words, but I understand you guys are on strike. You are welcome to come into our backyard and practice during the strike. And our backyard was like a quarter acre at the most. I don't think, could they have tossed back there, Bob? They probably could have lined up and tossed. That's about it.
Yep, that's about it.
So Ben dropped off for a minute. We were talking about that 99 team. You remember, Ben, where we were when it was a Friday night when they lost to the Brewers?
I don't remember where we were tonight. No, where were we?
We were at the Rileys' house, our friends the Rileys, and I just remember piling around the TV and watching. I can remember Eddie Taubensee made the last out in that Friday, because if they had won that, I don't remember exactly why it played out that way, but had they won on that Friday night, they would have won the division. And Taubensee lined out the Marquise Grissom. These things sort of get burned in your head, and
that would have avoided the one-game
people.
playoff or the one-game play-in, as you said.
That led to the one-game play. So the Reds, I think they lost Friday night to the Brewers. They lost Saturday. They won Sunday night. It went after midnight. There's rain delay, and they got in really late, and then they had to play the Mets. And we all went, right, Joe? I think we were down there for that game. And Casey in the first inning hit a ball right to the left field wall. And after that, the Reds couldn't do anything offensively. So it was kind of a bummer. Yeah.
Yeah, that was definitely.
Who was your favorite player?
I know we were chatting a little bit beforehand, and I don't know if you heard me mention that my dog's name is Larkin, so that might give you a little bit of an indication of, my favorite player as a kid, and even now, I love watching Barry Larkin play. I think he was an extremely underrated player historically. You hear people talk about the greatest shortstops, and, you really never even hear him mention. All the Derek Jeter talk kind of makes me sick to consider that I think Barry Larkin was every bit as good. So I was a huge fan of his. In that 99 season, I guess I also have to throw out special mention to Dimitri Young and Sean Casey. I was a big fan of both of those guys. Dimitri Young's career with the Reds didn't end up being quite as long as Casey's, but those were also guys that I really enjoyed when I was a kid.
Do you remember, Joe, going down and shagging the balls in the outfield?
I do. I remember, I think that was part of the reason that I became such a big fan of Sean Casey is he could not have been nicer to us. I mean, I think at that time, that was sort of before he had become as successful as he ended up being. It was early in his tenure with the Reds. And I just remember he was like a huge wrestling fan because there were some, WWE wrestlers or whatever. I was never big into wrestling, but he was like all jazzed up because those guys were there too. But then he came over and interacted with us and, went out of his way to say hi. And he was a super nice guy, which I think most people have come to find out that was not an act or anything. That's just the kind of guy he was.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was very genuine. Ben, some of your best memories as a Reds fan.
Oh man. trying to think of the best ones. Probably when Bruce hit that walk-off home run to clinch the playoffs would be my top one. Unfortunately, they haven't had a lot of winning seasons as, I've been an adult. I'd say really just watching the games with you guys. Joe, myself, and my dad go to a road game every year. So those are some of my favorite memories of those. I know that's going to jump the gun a little bit, but we were in Detroit last year. We've been to Pittsburgh, Milwaukee, Chicago. So those games on the road are some of my favorites.
Yeah. Fun. Best player you think you ever saw for the Reds? Not even necessarily your favorite, but the best.
Well, there's not a huge list to choose from, unfortunately. It's not like in the 70s where you're talking about some of the greatest players of all time. But for me, I would probably say, Barry Larkin was my favorite player. I also think he was probably the best all-around player. And then Joey Votto, who's been since sort of I was an adult, I think pretty easily the best player the Reds have had. And then now that Ellie, he's got a long ways to go, but Ellie's probably the most exciting player that I've watched for the Reds.
Yeah, best Reds player. Other than Willie Mo Pena, I would definitely say Joey Votto. I think he was so underappreciated by Reds fans. And I don't know if it was because of his contract or the amount of money he was making, but he just seemed so underappreciated. But he far outperformed his contract, and he was such a staple for so long, and he was so good for so long. Yeah, Joey Votto is the man.
Yeah,
we might have to throw Aristides Aquino's 1 month in the major leagues on the
Willie Mo got his
and Reese Hines week.
Yeah, those guys for those short periods of time.
They're pretty awesome.
Yeah,
what were you going to say?
Not to be too repetitive, but I think it's pretty clearly Votto and Larkin. I'd like to throw Johnny Cueto in there. He's my favorite Reds pitcher of all time, and I think he was pretty darn good for us.
He really was. It's interesting you mentioned Larkin being a little underappreciated and under the radar. Even on the Immaculate Grid, it's funny, when his name is available, like played shortstop, hit 30 home runs, he does not register high. I usually use him, and it's rare that he's more than like a 2%. He's just not on the top of people's minds, and I don't get it because he really was just so good. I guess he got like Joe said, maybe by Jeter and Ozzie Smith, and he got a little overshadowed. But that's really unfortunate but he's in the Hall of Fame, so I guess he he came out okay, I think. Yeah.
How about the most disappointing moment in your lifetimes? You guys are what? You're in your late 30s, man. I don't even know how old you are, frankly. What are you, like 35?
35. That's right, Randy. Just turned 35 earlier this week.
That's great. Happy birthday. What's your most disappointing memory? Let's start with Joe Greiner.
That's disappointing. There's more fertile territory here to talk about. Lots to choose from. I would say probably in 2012 when they went up 2-0 on the Giants, and then both of those games were on the road, so they went out west, won 2 games. It felt like a foregone conclusion they would take at least one of the next 3 at home. It was a 5-game series. They were up in game 3 and had a couple of uncharacteristic plays. I think Scott Rowland kind of booted a ground ball that ended up costing them in that game, and they kind of melted down from there. But even still, in Game 5, I think a lot of people just remember that they collapsed. But in Game 5, I believe Jay Bruce came up with a chance to either tie the game or maybe even had the tying run on base. He had a really good at-bat. I think he ended up striking out on a full count. But even till the last minute, I thought they were going to pull it out because that season they had such success. They had a great team. Great offense, great starting pitching, extremely good bullpen, and they were good defensively. They had a great team. I don't think they missed a start from one of their 5 starters the whole season until the first game of that series when Cueto got hurt. That kind of threw things into disarray for later in the series. But I just remember being crushed at that time that they lost. Although somewhat optimistic that was just the start of many playoff appearances and division championships, which I think in retrospect makes it even more disappointing because that just didn't really pan out that way.
Yeah. Yeah, that was tough. John Arardi says that 2012 team was built to win a world championship. I mean, they really had everything that you need in a short series, and it's really unfortunate. It's weird. I mean, I don't know if this is a curse of being a Cincinnati fan, but I think about Cueto with the oblique in that series. I think about Kenyon Martin breaking his leg in the basketball tournament. Tim Krumrie in the Super Bowl breaking a leg, and it's weird that those things happen to us in Cincinnati. I don't know. Maybe other cities can point to similar things, but man, there were some tough breaks that we've gotten as Cincinnati fans, I think. Yeah.
Bob, what about you?
We are definitely cursed, Jack. That is for sure. But we're lovable losers, so it's okay. Um, my worst memories, I would say the no-hitter against the Phillies in the playoffs when they got no-hit by Roy Halladay. There was so much anticipation leading up to that. And I can still remember in my mind Brandon Phillips hitting that little nubber back to the pitcher to end the game, and being in the basement of our house that I grew up in high school, and that was demoralizing. But then piggybacking off Joe, the 2012 playoff series against the Giants, my dad and I actually went out to San Francisco for the first two games.
Oh wow.
So we were getting back on the flight to come home, and we looked at each other like, hey, if they lose this series, then I don't know what to say, because they're in the perfect spot. And then, my buddy Kurt Freeman and I went down to Game 5. We had our Hulk cans with us. We had beers in each Hulk can. And Buster Posey swung a bat and ended the season. Hit that grand slam off of Matt Latos, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
it was.
I can still see that ball going out. Yeah, that was so disappointing.
Yeah, they when they came back, my firm that we had tickets for the next three games, and I said, you know what, I'll just wait till the next series. I'll use them the next series. So a little overconfident there, a little overconfident, I think. So
The Giants did go on to win the World Series, so I guess we should
that
say
is true.
Oh, that's
did
right.
lose to a good team, but yeah, I mean, to go up 2-0 on the road, only have to get one at home. I bet they didn't lose three straight or 3
They
games.
didn't. They had not lost three straight at home all year. I mean, it was just incredible. It was incredible. So I want to know, because we're going to cover both sides of the coin here. We talked about some of your favorite players. Any players that you just didn't like? I mean, for whatever reason.
Do managers count?
Managers count.
Well, then I think David Bell's probably at the top of my list on that. I can't stand the guy. I would like to see him no longer be employed by the Cincinnati Reds after this season. Honestly, before the season ends.
Yeah, Ben's been pretty consistent. Not a David Bell fan, so we'll see. It'll be interesting to see what they do after this season. This has been very disappointing.
Okay,
Anybody else?
Blue, who's your most disappointing player?
I am a very well documented Tyler Stevenson hater.
Oh,
But Ty Steve has made me eat my words a little bit this year. He's been a lot better. So he's come out of the doghouse. But I think this one's easy for me. Most hated Red of all time is Jim Edmonds. He should have never been on the Reds. He's a St. Louis Cardinal. When he played for the Reds, it was disgusting.
oh man, I am with you 100% on that, Bob. I hadn't thought about it. I sort of put Jim Edmonds out of my head, but I remember when they brought him over, I was like, oh, you got to be kidding
Yeah, and he
me.
wasn't around very long, but Walt Jocketty brought him over because Walt was with him in St. Louis, and yeah, that was not fun seeing him in a Reds uniform.
Joe?
Yeah, it's probably a little bit of recency bias, but Alexis Diaz has been very frustrating, at least this season. It feels like he's just given up some absolute backbreaking, home runs or blown saves at the worst possible time. I mean, we're recording this a day after he blew a save, although the Reds miraculously came back yesterday against the A's and won. But he's been very good overall, so I do think it would probably go to another reliever, David Weathers, who seemed like for a while, every time he came into the game, it was,
Stormy.
just dumping gasoline on the fire. So it's probably a relief pitcher, and I'm sure I'm I'm giving a pass to some of the truly awful players the Reds had, like in the mid 2000s and kind of the last decade or so, because I'm not going to blame a bad player for playing on the Reds and being because we don't have better options. So there was, unfortunately, probably a lot to choose from for the listeners.
I'm a little biased on this one, but our dad hated Willie Green so much. Willie Green is probably the name that I think of least favorite Red. Our dad, he couldn't stand that guy. So anytime I hear Willie Green, I think of him not being very good and a least favorite player. So in terms of actual players, it's got to be Willie Green.
I used Willie Green in the Immaculate Grid today. It was a Reds third baseman. I was like, I got to go with Willie Green. One of my favorite things that Ben never did was we were at Kings Island. I think it was in 2008 or 2009, and it was Reds Day at Kings Island, and people could get autographs. But I guess when that ended, the Reds they got to ride rides, and we were waiting in line on a ride, and all of a sudden this group of Reds comes up, and they just go to the front of the line, and Ben says, "Why do we have to wait for them? They should wait for us. They're the ones who suck." I don't think any of the Reds heard it, but it was borderline loud enough that maybe they might have. So that was pretty funny. That was pretty good.
Hey, I've got a question. Just popped into my mind. Us old guys seem to talk about the big red machine a lot, and that's now 50 years ago. And I just wonder if you guys get tired of hearing about the big red machine.
I will speak for everyone in Cincinnati under the age of 40, a resounding yes.
I would say I don't get sick of some parts of it, but what does get really irritating is when you hear people or read comments, on any type of article that's like, well, in 1975, the Reds would have done X, Y, Z. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, they had 4 or 5 Hall of Famers in their order. It's not really fair to compare it to what we've been putting out there as of late. But yeah, I'm just jealous, I think, more than anything. My
absolutely.
Irritation is born out of jealousy that I didn't get to experience such a glorious period in the Reds' history. So
that's what I was going to say. If we see that much winning, I think, JT was on the video earlier. I think he's going to hear a lot of that talk. I would never shut up about it. So, no, I'm happy to hear it. I just want to know a time when we actually win some games.
It was pretty amazing. It really was. Although you talk about disappointing moments, and see, I've been thinking about. I know the Reds just really had a terrible 1971 season, and I was thinking, as disappointing as this season has been, I bet that was. As I think about it, I was fairly young at the time, but I'm sure we were all really. And I'd love to go back. I may do this and just do a little bit of a deep dive and try to figure out why they fell off the table so badly. Because really, every other year in the 70s, even though they didn't win the division every year, if there had been wild cards back then, I think the Reds would have been in the playoffs. I'm almost certain in 78 and probably 74, in addition to their other appearances. So, I mean, it was just 71 was that just sort of a weird aberration of a year. And I don't remember what caused it exactly. But I should do a little research on that. So.
Jack, you should do some research on that. Hey, boys, I'm curious about radio and TV announcers. Who's your favorite radio or TV announcer during your lifetime, and who do you like to turn the volume down on?
That's another one I'm going to ask Ben to go first because he has some very strong opinions and some strong.
I'm with you, Ben. Let's see if we align here.
Those spicy takes, Well,
I'll be interested to hear what you have, Bob. I'm a really big Cowboy fan. I think he's by far the best they have. I think Cowboy's the best. I like Welsh a lot too. Other than that, I will mute basically anyone who's talking about them. I was not a big Tom Brenneman fan at all, so I'm glad he's off the broadcast. We'll say that.
All right, pretty
Hey,
good
Bob.
answers. I definitely think the Cowboys the best that we have now. Chris Welsh is good for his analysis. I think Sadak is just, I'm sure he's a very nice guy, but he's nauseating to listen to when they're losing. 8-0, and Will Benson's hitting 190, and he's coming up to bat, and we hear about how great Will Benson is in the clubhouse, and he's such a positive influence on the team. It rings a little hollow. Yeah, I mean, I was more of a Marty and Tom guy. I liked their blunt way of approaching things and kind of them just telling it how it was.
Yeah, I would say that I really like Cowboy and Welsh. They very rarely, but occasionally will do games together, and I think that's by far the best combo that they have since, both of those guys pitched for a long time in the majors, and they actually seem to do a pretty good job together and seem to enjoy it. So those those don't happen very often, but when those two are together, I think they do a really nice job. I don't really listen to the radio nearly as much as I used to. I mean, I liked Marty and Joe. I was fairly young when they were on, but I thought that they were a great duo. Marty, I think towards the end started to get a little bit crankier than when he was working with Joe, but it's hard to blame him for some of those teams that he was broadcasting. I was never a huge Tom fan. I thought he was, it's one thing to listen to Marty go in on somebody with all the experience and all the baseball that he had seen. I thought Tom got really negative at the end. And I just remember one time Tom was just going crazy because somebody failed to get a sacrifice bunt down and he was working with Cowboy. And Cowboy finally said something like, Tom, it's a little bit harder than it looks. And it was very subtle, but I think it was sort of a clear message like, look, you never played baseball a day in your life, at least after grade school. So maybe take it a little bit easy on some of these guys. And I was, that's part of, I think, Cowboy's charm too. He's good at telling it like it is. He's insightful, he knows the game really well, but he still has a good sense of humor about things.
We have
I guess
we
to
have a
go full
running.
circle, we got to name George Grand too. Bob, I agree with you on Sadak, and I think he picked up the mantle from George Grand being overly optimistic in a terrible season, silly nicknames. So, I guess it's been a big fall off since Marty and Joe back in the day. Those guys were pretty great, and some of the newer guys not so much.
Yeah, I did say Barry Larkin's my all-time favorite Reds player. So I'm just going to say that I don't think that he's as good of a broadcaster as he was a baseball player. And I'm going to leave it with that.
We have a running joke in our house. If a ball comes off the bat and I get too excited about it, Ben refers to me as George Graham because George tended to misjudge fly balls on a pretty regular basis. Hit pretty good, and caught by the center fielder. So
Bob always calls those girlfriend fly balls.
girlfriend.
All the girlfriends get excited in the stands on a routine fly ball that goes about 380 feet to center field.
So we talked a little bit about our road trips, and Bob, you've obviously been to some road experiences with the Reds. Just wondering which ones you stand out. What's like your favorite visiting park to go to?
That trip to San Francisco was amazing. We had such a good time out there, and that ballpark is so cool how it sits on the bay. But then I've also been to Wrigley Field for a few different Reds games in a bunch of different settings. I know I've been up there with my dad, been up there for a bachelor party, been up there on a rooftop for a playoff game. That wasn't the Reds actually though, Dad. That was the Dodgers and the Cubs one year.
Yeah.
But I've always loved going to Wrigley, and it's cool to go up there and see Reds fans in the stands because we're so used to seeing a lot of Cubs fans in the stands when they play here. So I think those years around like 2012, 13, 14, when the Reds were pretty good, it was a lot of fun to go up to Wrigley and watch them.
Hey, Bob, what about our road trip with your two cousins?
Yeah, Yankee Stadium, Fenway, and
Come on.
Baltimore.
Baltimore. Very good.
Yep. Camden Yards.
Joe, Ben, you guys want to chime in?
Yeah, I'm happy to start off. I'm sure Ben will have some additional insight. I think the favorite trip that we have gone on together was when we went up to Milwaukee. I believe that was in 2013. think that that's necessarily the best stadium or the coolest stadium we've been to, but the Reds were actually pretty good that year. There was nobody in the stadium. We went in September, and the Brewers weren't very good at that time. So we got to see the stadium from like, tons of different vantage points. We just moved around seats, and the Reds were winning that game, and we knew that Chapman was going to get up and start warming up. And the way that their bullpen is set up, there are seats right on top of the bullpen. So we went down when we saw that he was likely going to get up and start throwing, and we're sitting in the first row, just a few feet from him, watching him warm up, and that was pretty cool to see that, up close. Just him getting ready in the bullpen, and I mean, he was throwing it at that time well over 100 miles an hour, which wasn't as common then as it is now. So that was a really cool experience, and we just had a great time in Milwaukee. Their ballpark is sort of on the outskirts of the city, so people were like tailgating and stuff in the parking lot, which is cool to see for a baseball game.
Yeah, I was going to say the same one. Watching Chapman warm up was incredible. I mean, when the catcher caught the ball, it sounded like a gunshot. And also, when we saw him warming up, there was this huge security guard who poured a 5-hour energy into a Red Bull in front of him. So I'll never forget that. He was he had a lot of energy. So that was hard to forget. We also went to Pittsburgh. It was the second to last game of the season, and both the Reds and Pirates were awful. So the game didn't really matter, but that ballpark is gorgeous. I think it's the prettiest park that I've ever been to. And, when you don't really care about who's going to win the game, it's nice to walk around and see everything. So that was another highlight for me.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say about Pittsburgh is I think we almost got our seats were too good. We sat sort of in the equivalent of the diamond seats because we had a connection to get tickets. And so we didn't really get to walk around and explore some of the other parts of the park as much as we have on other trips. So we'll have to go back sometime and check out more of the ballpark. And I'd also throw out a special recommendation for Cleveland. I think that they have a really nice ballpark. We've been up there quite a bit because it's not too far away, and have seen sort of all different parts of that ballpark. And it's been around now for a while, but it still feels like one of the coolest parks that we've been to, which I think is a testament to them when they built that stadium, I think in the 90s, because it still seems like it's very cool.
Yeah.
We're going to St. Louis in a couple of weeks, so we were hoping to see a game that would matter for the Reds' march to the playoffs. So we're just going to settle for watching a crummy St. Louis team, which is not a terrible consolation.
Yeah, just as long as the Reds win, that'll be nice. So, yeah, we've had some fun trips. How about trades? What trades stand out to you in your experience as either really good or really bad?
Well, Bob said his name earlier. William Opeña for Bronson Arroyo was an absolute steal for the Reds. I still remember Bronson's second start against the Cubs where he pitched a gem and hit a home run against Glendon Rush. That's one that pops out to me immediately as an absolute fleecing for the Reds.
Yeah, I think the Reds catch a lot of flack for some of the moves that they make, but Walt Jocketty traded Alfredo Simon for Eugenio Suarez. Dick Williams traded Dan Straley for Luis Castillo. And then most recently, the trade for Steer, CES, and the third piece that they ended up turning into Will Benson. And the Twins ended up getting, I think, 2 starts out of Tyler Mahle after that in return for 6 years of Steer, 6 years of CES, and I think 5 or 6 years of Benson.
Yeah, going back a little bit further, I mean, I think, was it Jeff Shaw that the Reds traded for Sean Casey, or was it a starting pitcher?
Dave Burba.
Yeah, so I mean, that turned out to be a really good deal. And, Sean Casey, as you mentioned before, was one of my favorite players. So that was a good one. They haven't had as many terrible trades. I mean, they made it kind of a big trade with the Dodgers when they traded Homer Bailey to get off his salary. And they gave up some prospects who, for a little while, were highly regarded. But, that one turned out to be not great, I guess. But it wasn't. I don't think they've had as many where they've really gotten fleeced compared to, all the ones that Ben and Bob mentioned were really big wins.
Maybe the Latos one.
Who's your favorite mascot, you guys? Who do you like? Rosie, Mr. Redlegs, Mr. Reds, Gapper? Who's on the top of the list?
I would push Gapper off of the top of the fire stacks. I'm gonna go with Mr. Red is my favorite, and I speak for Roman, my 4-year-old as well. Loves Mr. Well, no, I'm sorry, I shouldn't speak for him. He would say Rosie Red. He has met Rosie 4 or 5 different times and just runs and tackles her. It's actually pretty funny. Um, but I would say Mr. Red. I'm always rooting for him in the mascot race in his little car.
Yeah, my kids also are big fans of Mr. Red and Mr. Redlegs, and they actually, they might still, I haven't asked them recently, but they believe that Mr. Red actually lives in the Red Stadium 100% of the time. So that would always give us a chuckle when we drive past, like the Reds aren't playing in like December, and they're like, "Oh, hi, Mr. Red," because I think he's just always there.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, Joe. My son Roman thinks that all of the Reds live at the stadium, and all the Cyclones live at the U.S. Bank, and then all the Bengals live at Paul Brown. So when we leave, the Reds games, he'll look at U.S. Bank Arena or whatever it's called now, and he'll be like, "Hey, Cyclones." It's pretty funny.
Good for him.
Mr. Redlegs is on my shirt, so I think I have to go with him.
We went to a game in Cleveland, and because of a connection we have up there, we parked literally under the stadium where the players and where the team bus came in, and the game ended, and we were sort of waiting around our car, and the Indians mascot Slider, who's kind of the equivalent of Gapper, comes out carrying like in costume, but carrying his head. And it just looked so funny. And we started talking to him, and we were like, "Yeah, what are you doing after the game?" He goes, "I'm going to go out and get some drinks with Gapper." It just was, I thought it was so funny. There was just like, I presume he took off the costume before they went out for drinks. I don't know, maybe not.
I do agree with Bob though that Gapper could easily be, as he said, pushed off the fire stacks analogy.
Off the fire stacks, off the pilot house, any of the above.
Kind of violent. This podcast taking a dark turn here, guys. I mean, so that's pretty rough. So how about word association? We're going to throw some names out and just see what you think. Johnny Cueto.
I think underrated. I think he's been probably the best Red starting pitcher for the last 15, 20 years. And I just don't think he gets mentioned all that much. So that would be my word.
I definitely agree with Ben. I think he's been one of the Reds' best pitchers in the last 10 or 15 years. But unfortunately, I just think of Pittsburgh every time I hear of Johnny Cueto and the Pittsburgh fans chanting his name and him dropping the ball on the mound in that play-in game.
Yeah. That was
Yeah,
rough.
I agree with both of those things. I also think about how his delivery towards the end of his Reds career, and now he still uses it, has just gotten so funky, which is kind of fun to watch. He's kind of like a throwback where he does that like extremely long, delayed delivery with all kinds of herky jerky movements. I always enjoyed watching that part of it.
Yeah, Cueto, I skipped high school one time, and that was to go down and watch Cueto's first start against the Diamondbacks when he went 7 one-hit innings. So hopefully Dad doesn't get too mad at me for skipping a day of high school, but at least it was
That's all right. Yeah.
to go see the Reds.
I want you to go tonight, go see Rhett Lauder, and hopefully bring him the same kind of luck, So, Adam Dunn.
Dunn makes me think of Marty, because Dunn and Marty had such an interesting relationship, and it seemed like there wasn't a lot of love lost there. So I can't really think of Dunn without thinking about the way Marty would talk about him at times, and when Dunn called in during a rain delay and kind of gave Marty a hard time on the banana phone. I always remember that.
They need to bring back the banana phone.
Yeah, I agree.
Joe stole mine. Mine was going to be banana phone. So sometimes I watch that on YouTube.
How about Homer Bailey?
I don't know if it's because I saw him out downtown one time or something, but I think of cowboy hat and cowboy boots.
Bob, that's so funny. I was
have
going to
no
say,
idea why I think, but I think I've seen him wearing that.
yeah, I was going to say weirdo because I saw him out one time at Mount Adams. He had a cowboy hat on and cowboy boots, but we waited in line to go to the bathroom, and he was very strange. And by the end of it, I was the one that was sort of like All right, nice to meet y'all. See you later. And I was the one that was trying to get away from him. I think you would normally expect a fan to be the one, instead of the
That is
player, but
weird.
he was a strange guy.
That's funny. Yeah, I remember that story. How about Hunter Green?
Future Cy Young.
Elite.
Like it. Yeah, there's not
Yeah, I
much
hope
to
the
add
elbow's
there.
okay.
Back healthy. Yeah. And, it's interesting. One thing I think about Hunter Green is he was drafted sort of with this thought that maybe he could be a two-way player, and they put an end to that right away, which is probably the right thing to do. But now that you're seeing what Otani's doing, you can't help but wonder maybe if they had let him try to hit for a little bit longer, maybe he could have been our version of Shohei.
How about Dusty Baker?
A guy I'd want to get a beer with. He just seems like the coolest guy in the world. I think he'd be extremely fun to sit down and have a conversation with, and also a heck of a manager.
Yeah, his toothpick. I guess toothpick has to be the word association with him. He was the best. I can't believe the Reds ever got rid of him. Yeah, I just remember he was always smiling. I remember Brandon Phillips had some sort of negative interaction with C. Trent at one point, and the video, Dusty Baker just laughing at it makes me laugh every time.
Yeah, I was going to say underrated. I think he was a really underrated manager for us and for really his whole career till he finally won a championship, which I was happy to see. But, he got fired after, if you look at his record and what he did with the, time he was with us, and then you compare how long David Bell's been the manager and the results, obviously there was more talent on some of Dusty's teams, but it definitely felt like he got the best out of all the teams that he managed. And I don't know if you could say the same for some of the guys that have followed who seem to have been given a lot longer leash. So I don't know what the reason for that was. The Reds just got cheaper. They don't want to fire people or what. But I was sad to see him go, and he was obviously successful everywhere he went after that. He was successful everywhere he was before that.
Yeah, no doubt. So you guys think you'll ever see a World Series championship in your lifetime? In your lifetime, not my lifetime. That's too short of a window, I think.
Well, yeah, we're going to see one this year. He didn't specify it's going to be the Reds, so
Yes.
I think the Reds. I'm an optimist, so I'm going to say yes. I think we will see another championship in our lifetime. I think they have a core right. I think they have a core right now that needs to be supplemented, but they at least have the pieces that if they are smart about spending some money and if they actually go out and spend some money, it's no guarantee that they can win it all because baseball, the best team doesn't always win. But I think that there's no reason that they couldn't at least be in the mix to, a couple times in the next, 5 or 6 years, which is how long the Valley De La Cruz for. So I think there's going to be at least a shot at it. And I will remain optimistic.
I will too. I think in the next, hopefully 5 or 6 years they can. They certainly have the pieces right now, and they've got some guys in the minor leagues who I think could come up and really help in the next 3 or 4 years. So fingers crossed. Hopefully they'll do it.
Hey, Jack,
Yeah,
can
I'll
I
definitely
jump
say
in
yes,
here with a
too.
question? Boys, what's your favorite baseball movie of all time?
Easy. The Sandlot.
I knew you were going to say that, Bob.
I agree with Bob. I love that movie.
That is a great movie. We just let our kids, our 7-year-old and
I didn't hear
5-year-old,
what you
watch
said,
that
Bob.
for the
Which one did you
first
say?
time this last year, and I will say it holds up very well, and both of my kids loved it. But I will quickly have to. He said this.
Sandlot.
Sandlot. Oh, okay.
But I'll also
love the Sandlot.
I'll also throw
Love
out
that film.
Major League and League of Their Own as two of my other favorites. I think those are both really good for different reasons, but those three are definitely three of my favorites.
You not let your kids watch Major League, though, I hope, right?
Not yet. We'll wait a few years for that one.
I don't know if
A
I should
good
tell
recent baseball movies. Everybody Wants Some. I don't know if you guys have seen that. I would highly recommend it.
So I got to tell
I'm sorry, I
the
didn't
story.
hear that.
I got to tell the story. We're talking about baseball movies. I got to tell the story when we went to see Angels in the Outfield. Ben was 5 years old, and in the middle of the movie, and we were at the there was a dollar movie theater over in Norwood for a while. It's now an Arby's, I think, or whatever it is. But in the middle of the movie, Ben farts really loud. And the people in front of us turn around and look, and Ben, without missing a beat, says, "Nice fart, Dad." He was 5. He was a strange child, but
Yeah, that's
that
a
was fun.
legendary
That's
story in our house. My
That's
kids
a
love.
legendary story in the Greiner household. So anyway,
They did watch Angels in the Outfield for the first time a couple weeks ago, and so they were telling that story for days and days and days till they watched the movie.
it lives on. It lives on. Well, guys, listen, I appreciate you taking the time. This was a lot of fun, and we got some good perspective. We've had a lot of you guys. I think I was thinking about you guys might be among the youngest guests we've had, so it's good to get a little younger perspective here instead of the old guys talking about the old days.
Yeah, I think the only one that might rival him, Jack, is Annie Sabo.
Yeah,
She's
that's
probably
true.
younger.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's
The guy
great.
walked
Well,
the moon. He seemed a little bit on the younger side.
Oh yeah,
After,
Eli. Yeah,
yes,
Yeah.
had a few younger, but
we've had a
yeah.
few. All right. Well, we appreciate it, guys. Thanks for the time today.
Thanks for having us.
About Cincinnati, what a team, what a team, what a team. And lady, from 1 to 80, how they scream, how they scream, how they scream.